We are recording now, and the meeting is started.
Yeah. So welcome everybody to this month's SAMOCAN. SAMOCAN stands for Santa Monica Climate Action Network, a project of Climate Action Santa Monica. We have a great program lined up today with our guest, Robert Lempert. At CASM, we try to understand the ever-evolving global issues surrounding the climate first, and then bring that knowledge home to shape what we can do here for the greatest impact. Rob knows all about the big picture, global perspective, and we've asked him to share that with us and prompt us to think about how we think globally and act locally. And first, we're going to give an update to CASM, and I'm going to turn it over to our executive director and co-chair, Lorene Von Clam.
Thanks, Mario. So CASM, I think pretty much everyone here knows CASM quite well, but I'll just, to summarize, we're committed to engaging the community in local solutions that will have a significant, lasting, transformative impact. So what does that mean? An example is that we seek to encourage our largest energy users to make the switch to clean, renewable energy, thereby building out a new renewable energy system for all. The Santa Monica Malibu School District just made that switch, and thanks to work by CASM, the students and others, we are moving forward with them on that and a lot of other initiatives. We also support people modeling and demonstrating how to participate in transformative action. For example, a few weeks ago, we had an electrification house party so that people could hear from neighbors about how they are ditching polluting, unhealthy gas in their own homes. The transformation from gas to electric fuel in buildings is a transformative action on a large scale that needs individual participation to ultimately be effective. We're also working on local transportation and advocating for a fully built out mobility system that provides lots of options and solves some troubling realities. In particular, we would like it to be more possible for kids to get school using low emissions active transportation. It's good for their health, their minds, and the planet. And shockingly, almost 2/3 of kids are driven to Santa High in a single family vehicle. So it's indeed a problem that is in need of a transformative, long-lasting solution. We have two groups of young people working with us now, our Climate Corps and our Climate Job Corps. Climate Corps is our summer program, and our Job Corps has been year-round aiming to create career opportunities and learning and leadership opportunities for young people. There's a lot happening in the city of Santa Monica. Just want to let all of you know that in June, there will be a bunch of ordinances brought forth to the city council having to do with building performance standards, electrification, electric vehicle chargers. And we need people to show up, speak up, and cheer on the electeds making the tough decisions about how we move forward. And lastly, we need volunteers to do all kinds of things, so please get in touch. With me, climateactionsantamonica@gmail.com, and we will find a good way for you to plug in, so to speak. So now let's move on to our presentation. After that, we'll take questions from the chat and answer a few questions CASM members have given me beforehand, because we do put this up on YouTube and we do get some views, people who look at it afterwards, which is we're very pleased about. So please put your questions in the chat. We are a small group, so I'm anticipating we will be able to move to a more conversational format, but we will address the questions in the chat first. So Mario, please introduce Rob.
Yes, Robert Lempert is director of the Frederick S. Pardee Center for Longer Range Global Policy and the Future Human Condition, a principal researcher at RAND, and a professor of policy analysis at the Pardee Rand Graduate School. His research focuses on risk management and decision-making under conditions of deep uncertainty. Lempert's work aims to advance the state of the art for organizations managing risk in today's fast-paced, transformative, and surprising change, and help organizations adopt these approaches to help make proper stewardship of the future more commonly practiced. He is a fellow of the American Physical Society, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, coordinating lead author for Working Group 2 of the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report, a chapter lead for the 4th U.S. National Climate Assessment, chair of the peer review panel for California's 4th Climate Assessment, a member of California's Climate Safe Infrastructure Working Group, and has been a member of numerous study panels for the U.S. National Academies, including America's Climate Choices and Informing Decisions in a Changing Climate. Lempert was the inaugural EADS Distinguished Visitor in Energy and Environment at the American Academy in Berlin, and the inaugural president of the Society for Decision-Making Under Deep Uncertainty. Lempert is an author of the book, Shaping the Next 100 Years, New Methods for Quantitative Longer-Term Policy Analysis. He earned his PhD in Applied Physics from Harvard University. Welcome, Robert Lempert. The floor is yours.
Great. No, thanks, Mario. Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. CASM is such a great organization, and so it's a real pleasure to talk with you guys. I love spending time with the CASM. Don't get to spend as much time as I like. So when Maureen said, "Oh, do you want to come give a talk?" and tell us about your thoughts on sort of the from the global perspective and how that relates to CASM, it's like, oh yeah, I'll do that. And it's really been a fun opportunity to try to collect some thoughts. So let me get my slides up, and I'll talk for like 15 minutes or so, and then would love to dive into a conversation. So, bing. Okay. Do people see my slides?
Yes.
Great. Okay, good. Yeah, and I think this one. Okay, great. So, Lorraine, you used the word transformative a lot in your comments, and so I wanted this has become a major theme. So I wanted to riff on this theme a little bit, beginning with some big global trends. Talk about this word concept was a big issue in the last IPCC report. We could chat about that. So take you through that a little bit. Talk a little bit about some ideas that I think are really important, at least the way I think about these problems, and then launch into implications for local groups like CASM. So let's and then the disclaimer down at the bottom that these are my musings and not connected to any organization, etc. Great. Okay, good. So I want to start out with this idea of this great acceleration and kind of use it to pull together a couple of different threads of ideas. And so, over the last 70 years or so, we've been going through this great acceleration, which is defined as a dramatic, continuous, and roughly simultaneous surge in many fundamental measures of human activity, and then our impact on the Earth and its ecosystems. And so in roughly my lifetime, human population has doubled. That's on the slide here. Per capita income has risen by about a factor of 10. Half of all humans now live in cities. We've gone from basically a rural to a urban population. About 2 billion people have been lifted out of poverty. And then inequality among nations has gone down. China, India are now much closer to the U.S. and Europe, Western Europe in GDP per capita. But in general, inequality within nations has gone up, and this is a measure of inequality in the U.S. from Piketty's work, Capital of the 21st Century, where down in the 50s and through about roughly the 70s, it shows the share of income held by the richest Americans. But this actually looks pretty similar across many countries. And so concurrently, we've been transgressing these planetary boundaries. And this is this planetary boundary idea where there are, it's like roughly a dozen wedges here representing different Earth systems. So it's climate change, it's the stratospheric ozone, aerosol loading, ocean acidification, nitrogen and phosphorus flows, freshwater, land systems, various measures of the integrity of ecosystems. And so for each one of these, the people who put together these planetary boundaries, essentially the Stockholm Resilience Institute and associates, rank where we are in each. And so, green is we're still doing okay, red is we're doing really bad. So extinctions, a species extinction is the one up in the upper left, and then down the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, the ones where we're already way off the charts, and the others, climate, land use, are in danger zones. We're still okay in many of the others, according to this. So there's actually been a recent update of this, which I didn't get onto the chart, where we're doing worse on many of these. So, by many metrics, the Great Acceleration has a lot of success stories to it. I'm very taken, sort of list of books that have been very influential on me over the last couple of years. The economic historian Brad DeLong, who's up at Berkeley, it's called The Long 20th Century, from about 1870 to about 2008. And, for a millennia, most humans lived in poverty, and wealth, population, and technology grew slowly. Then around 1870, with the market economy, globalization, modern corporation, and the Industrial Research Lab, we had this explosion of growth. And basically, for the first time ever, much of humanity started coming out of poverty, starting in the US and Japan, and then spreading the rest of the world. But now, for a bunch of reasons, the success is beginning to unravel, at least in DeLong's story. And DeLong goes through, he's not an environment person, but it's interesting to lay this out against the environment. So he lays out what he calls first the golden age of social democracy, which was about 1845 to the mid-70s, where a top-down alliance of government, industry, and labor guided policy and provided growth opportunity and shared wealth, at least to white men in the industrialized core. Then this golden age dissolved and was replaced by a subsequent period of neoliberalism, which more people found their voice. And oh, by the way, this is the birth of the environmental movement. But society ceded more decisions to markets domestically and used globalization to reduce the autonomy of national governments. So this then began to unravel about 10 years ago with the financial crisis, massive financial shocks, rising inequality, hollowing out of the middle class, and then this huge pressure on our environment and the Earth's ecosystems. And in DeLong's telling, and lots of other people tell the story in different ways, we're now searching around for how do we govern ourselves in a way that that takes advantage of all we've done to lift people out of poverty, but deals with these huge pressures that are basically causing the current system to collapse. And it's this sort of having come up against all these limits and needing a new system that is underlying this idea of transformation. And in the IPCC, the notion that transformation is starting to become inevitable. So let's turn to that. This is, I'm going to lay out a figure that's at the front end of the summary for policymakers for the Sixth Assessment Report, so the latest assessment report. And the summary for policymakers, there's thousands of pages of this report. And then there's a short 20, 30-page summary for policymakers, but this is also the part which is co-produced with the governments, and that the scientist authors write a draft, and then you go through it, line by line, and negotiate the exact wording with the governments, and also the figures. So this is, in some sense, the global consensus on these issues. And so this figure, which I label transformation is inevitable, which is not language that is actually in the report. Some of us tried, but it didn't quite get in like that. But the implications are simply there. So this basically tries to take a systems view where we've got human society, we've got climate change, we've got the Earth's ecosystems, and they are trying to support each other, but pressures on each are undermining each of those. And this is creating all sorts of risks. And there's the classic risk propeller in the middle, where you got the intersection from a climate perspective, at least climate hazards, interacting with human vulnerability and exposure to generate risks and all sorts of adverse impacts. What we'd like to get to is a much more balanced system where the future climate, we've undergone transitions in our energy systems, our urban systems, rural infrastructure, the way society is organized, and how we manage, and then our ecosystems, the way land is managed, the way biodiversity and humans interact with nature, so it becomes self-supporting. The definition of transformation is a change in the fundamental attributes of a system, including the altered goals and values. And as it says here, the Sixth Assessment Report implies transformation is inevitable, but doesn't say it outright, at least in the summary for policymakers. So how do we get from the left to the right? The report identifies 4 what are called enablers. So governance, finance, knowledge and capacity, technology, and then catalyzing conditions, which is kind of the euphemism for not letting crises go to waste. So how do we think about this transformation, getting from one to another? Okay. And so one thing that is an emerging theme is very much this idea that transformation is a collective action challenge, meaning lots of different independent agents need to work together. And these agents are independent in that they all make their own decisions, yet interdependent. And they interact with a mix of competition and cooperation. And so this is the environment where we need to move from the left side of this figure to the right. Oh, and then the way at least the report frames up where we're trying to head and what is our vision of where we're trying to get is this label of climate resilient development, which basically regards climate mitigation, reducing greenhouse gases, adaptation, adapting to the unavoidable or not avoided climate impacts, and then development, which is characterized in terms of enhanced human well-being, along with ecosystem health and planetary health. So those are climate resilient development, and equity is built into that as well, is where we're trying to get to. 2 books that influence my thinking a lot and relevant to this is, one is by 2 political scientists, Charles Sable and David Victor, which look at this idea of what they call experimentalist governance. So this is, one at least piece of a model about what comes after what DeLong calls, the golden age of social democracy, neoliberalism, and what do we do next? And so looking at it through a climate lens, they talk about what they call experimentalist governance. And they look through a whole bunch of different case studies. Actually, a really interesting book. They talk a lot about the Montreal Protocol, and they talk a lot about the CARB, California Resources Board. And then they've got some overseas case studies as well. But they basically try to pull out a model for how one at least does transformational change, at least in those sectors where there's some potential for transformative technological change. So at the Montreal Protocol, they're interested in the phasing out of CFCs, and with CARB, they're very interested in the emerging CARB catalyzing the emerging revolution in automotive technology. And so how they see it is setting consensus, ambitious but consensus goals among these many actors, and then basically forming a lot of groups where people from the government side, industry side, and we'll get to this in a second because they're not very community oriented, but work out together the details of how you get to these goals. And they go through in great detail for both CARB and for the Montreal Protocol about all the different groups that came together to work at different parts of the technology. These are very ad hoc, so they're working one problem and then they realize that, to deal with this problem, you need something that someone else is working on, so you bring them in. So it's these very fluid groups working on it. And then, sometimes the businesses go off and say, well, if we could only do this, we figured out how to do this. So, we made a step forward. Sometimes it's like they're stuck, and then the government side said, oh, well, okay, well, we can fund some research to on this particular topic, and say we make a breakthrough. The goals are negotiable. I mean, they're consensus, but they're negotiable. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. And then sort of outside the whole process is this hammer of a penalty default that is in a serious inducement for everybody to play fairly and take it seriously. So in both the Montreal Protocol and the California automotive context, they regard that penalty default as being there. Part of this idea of experimentalist governance is driven by the notion that we can set goals, but if the goals that are all, if they're at all transformative and worthwhile, we in fact don't really know how to get there, and so we need to deal with that uncertainty and make that our friend as opposed to our enemy. Much of my work is wrapped around this idea of decision-making under deep uncertainty. How do we do policy analysis? How do we make policy in situations where we're sure to be, the one thing we know for certain is we're going to be surprised, and those can be bad surprises or those can be good surprises. And certainly in the climate world, we're having both now. The climate is changing faster than most of the models, most scientists were willing to write down. But on the other side, the cost of, say, renewables, the technology is changing much faster than experts thought 5-10 years ago. I mean, in many cases, renewables, particularly solar, is now cheaper than fossil fuels in many cases. So the low cost option is decarbonization. So how do you shape the future even when you can't predict it? It looks very similar in some respects to this fixing the climate, this experimentalist governance. Articulate goals, potential policies to achieve them, stress test your policies over many scenarios, look for policies which are robust, resilient, which are often adaptive over time, and embed the analytics in deliberative processes so that stakeholders and the experts, government, scientists, technologists, et cetera, can co-design actionable strategies. So this is, if you want to put it in a philosophical basis, this is, comes out of the pragmatist tradition, James Dewey, in the modern era, Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize economist and moral philosopher, writes, very beautifully about these sorts of ideas. Okay, so what does that mean when you look at it through then the local lens, which is certainly very powerful in this notion of polycentric, multi-layered governance, which is many negotiating partners in government, business, civil society moving us towards these transformations. A group like CASM can influence a whole bunch of the different of the enablers I showed you on the earlier slide, the enablers of transformation. Certainly governance, knowledge and capacity, and learning. You mentioned like each of those, educating people on how to go electric, showing up at the city council meetings, and catalyzing conditions. Creating the political and energize populace to try to create the openings and the push for advancing. A bunch of key challenges, though. This experimentalist governance in many ways is a really powerful model for how we actually get to where we need to go, but certainly the way that Sable and Victor lay it out is a pretty exclusive affair. And and we certainly have a lot of these processes and regulations that try to open up the process. Sometimes they work pretty well, sometimes they just empower people who can afford the best lawyers. But how do we be experimentalists? And how do we, have all these negotiations going on and make them inclusive as well, which I think is a real challenge. Where actually a lot of my work is on those sort of topics, but I think a group like CASM, which is both community inclusive, but can bring expertise, a lot of expertise, is one answer to that challenge. To what extent should we favor, many technology experiments versus being focused on the most preferred technology pathways? If you look, for instance, at the National Renewable Energy Lab study for the city of LA on decarbonizing, getting to a zero carbon grid by 2035, they show it's possible. They show it actually saves the city a lot of money because if you're don't even count any of the climate damages, if you just look at the health benefits for getting current fossil fuels out of our neighborhoods, you save a lot more money on health than it costs to decarbonize, though the money are in totally different pots, which is a problem. But what they actually do is end up with, in their scenarios, they end up with a lot of renewables out of basin, and then they end up, because of transmission and other constraints, with a lot of new fuels, hydrogen and other new fuels generation in basin. So, how much do we buy that? How much do we want to push for a different future? Carbon capture is something that I've been working on. We suck the carbon out of the air often with technological means. And all the IPCC, it's totally unproven right now, super expensive, but pretty much all the IPCC scenarios that get anywhere close to 1.5, and many of the ones that even get to 2 degrees, have not an insignificant amount of carbon capture. How much do we want to buy into that sort of bet? And then finally, how do we think about this balancing ambitious goals, which we certainly need, against the risk of missing goals, of overshoot? And this topic of overshoot has become, an increasingly prevalent one in the climate discussion, because we're actually getting pretty close to 1.5 degrees. And so maybe it's not that we can stop there, but we're going to go over and come back. A lot of ambitious goals for 2030, 2035. What is the balance between setting ambitious goals, which can be very important to drive innovation, to get people motivated, versus the danger of missing those? And just 2 stories on that, and then we'll open it up for questions. A number of years ago, when we were first starting on this decision-making under uncertainty stuff, we do a lot of public policy stuff, but we were also doing some in the corporate world, and we were working for Volvo, and helping them sort of reconcile regarding some of their transformational product strategies. And it soon became really clear that, even within the same company, different parts of the company meant really different things by goals. And so the finance people meant goals to be things that, you were sure to meet, because it was really bad if you had a goal and then you missed it. That would, we would undercut your legitimacy. So they thought of goals as something that you really needed to hit. And so they were really willing to be conservative about them. Where on the marketing side, they would be kind of embarrassed if they hit their goals, or at least the senior people would be embarrassed if all the marketing people hit their goals. That would mean they weren't pushing people hard enough. So in some sense, goals were meant to be missed. And because you're trying to motivate people to do the best you can. So, this difference between, goals as the driver of energy and change, versus goals as legitimacy building is something that we really need to grapple with. Actually, I forgot what my other story was, so I'll remember it during the questions. So, excited now to dive into questions. Here's my email and a couple of websites with some potentially useful things on it. I'll see if I can.
Thank you.
So,
Unmute. Okay, we're going to start with the questions in the chat, and then we'll get to raised hands. Rob, wow, my head is so full of great inspiration and ideas from your presentation. Thank you so much. There are some of the questions that we have here have to do with clarifying some of the information in your presentation. So, for example,
yeah.
Kent requested a little more explanation of the penalty default and some examples of that.
Yeah, so a classic one is that California essentially, my camera died. All right, I'll fix that in a second. But California essentially threatens to exclude people from the market. So if you're an auto company dealing with CARB, if it starts to seem like you're negotiating in bad faith, there is at least a credible threat that the California polity will exclude you from the market. So that would be an example of a penalty default. What was it in the Montreal in Montreal Protocol? It was again similar that if you were a country or a firm, and the firms often came and said, we just can't do that by the year that you said, we're going to need more time on some avenues. Some avenues they went faster. And the penalty default was that, if the governments decided that you were not telling the truth, in particular if they decided that because some other company started to make a credible claim that they could make refrigerators without CFCs or particular chemicals, then you could just get excluded from the market. They would say, okay, well, we're just gonna we're gonna just pass a regulation to kick you out, and not let you participate. So in those cases, being denied an important market was what was an inducement not to cheat in the negotiations, not to to take the negotiations seriously.
Thank you. And some examples of catalyzing conditions.
Well, there's bad ones, like all of Canada catching fire, heat dome over Seattle. I mean, all the two epic droughts in California over 10 years. I mean, so all the all the climate damages that have turned climate change from something that scientists are warning about to something that pretty much everybody realizes they're living with. The technological opportunities where a lot of, many, polities and companies start to see real, economic opportunities in decarbonization, and political catalyzing conditions. I mean, all the activist groups that have made climate a really significant significant agenda item.
Thank you. Thank you for those examples. Well, I put a couple questions in the chat, but I don't want to hog things, but I want to open up. But so I encourage people to put questions in the chat if they can. Maybe some people are on their phone and it's hard to do. We will get to those in a moment. So I'm really intrigued by your point about empowering government. I think one of the things that is lost sometimes in the dialogue is that even among government officials, and I've heard this from some of our local electeds who've said, wow, climate is so big. I feel powerless to do anything. And my response was like, actually, you are in a hugely great position to have impact. So I guess I'm intrigued by how we empower government and how we empower experimentalist government. Are we asking, maybe a good example, would an example of experimental governance, for example, be when our city, despite the hue and outcry that happened afterwards, went crazy by trying out scooters, right?
Yeah.
Is that experimentalist governance?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's a good example. It was, sort of there, the catalyzing condition was a couple of tech companies coming in and dumping their scooters all over the place. But yeah, that was a situation where the government, the city government negotiated, after the firm, after the Bird and what's the other one? Oh my God.
Lyft or
Lyft, yeah, Bird and, yeah. Anyway, after the scooter companies came in and dumped the scooters on the streets, the government engaged in a basically, negotiations with them over what the rules should be. There was a lot of public pressure, and eventually iterated in on accommodations, which which the scooters aren't as prevalent as we thought they might be, but got to an accommodation. I think you start out the question with I do think Santa Monica is in a really unique and exciting position because the world really needs examples. Most government officials don't want to be the first one to do something, because for a variety of good reasons and bad reasons, they tend to be risk averse. And so having examples of how things can be done is incredibly powerful. So, I mean, actually, Santa Monica's work with scooters, was an important model. I think, so I think Santa Monica very much sees a lot of its, climate action as that. We're both doing it for our own benefits, but we're also doing it to create examples. I think Santa Monica, I think, has a lot more government capacity than most places, but one of the real challenges at the local level is we're asking, the situation demands cities do do things radically different, transformationally different. And there's a small number of people who are supposed to, figure out and guide this transition all the while they're doing, the other part of their job of, making sure the buses run, fixing potholes, doing plan checks and all that. So the more there are, partners that can be trusted. I mean, you could also be, also have adversarial or, advocacy roles to push the government, but they can be trusted to help out, to make suggestions, to build capacity, to help the small number of government officials who need to deal with these gigantic challenges. I think that is immensely helpful. I mean, I loved what CASM did, say, when the expo came in, showing people how to write it, right? There's just not enough government staff around to do that. But that's a powerful thing. So, I mean, this fast and fair idea is maybe where there's a big and interesting but more controversial challenge is like, a lot of people have said, one of the things we need to do to deal with climate change is build a lot of infrastructure much faster than the US has built anything for many years. One of the reasons it goes slowly is however imperfectly we're trying to be fair and inclusive and let everybody have their say. So are there ways to do that, but also do it quickly? And Santa Monica has a fabulous tradition of engagement and talking these things through. And if Santa Monica can help pioneer ways to do it faster, be more or even fairer than and more inclusive than we have been, but to do it faster, so we can actually have the transmission systems, build the bike lanes, build the facilities we need, the chargers, that would be another really interesting governance innovation that might be really, again, useful for us, but useful more broadly.
Thank you. Wow, that's inspiring. Leonora had a question. Are you aware of the advocacy in a lot of the climate community, for example, Extinction Rebellion, for lottery-based assemblies, sometimes called citizens' assemblies? Santa Monica almost moved forward for one on the airport issue, but the city council changed its mind at the last minute. Some in the climate community are doing work to hold global assemblies on climate. Is that something you see as valuable? I suspect that's an experimentalist community engagement opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think I really like the idea of citizen assemblies. There's a lot of really interesting experiments, and actually, if you Google, you'll see that I've got a very fun, edgy article that I wrote a couple of years ago, which suggests that a citizen assembly might be a way the US might be able to solve the problem of vesting way too much power in constitutional interpretation in 9 people that we might not trust so much. So I've always been a big fan of citizen assemblies. I mean, I think I don't think they replace, the legislative role, because legislators not only, represent their constituents, but they also are meant to be leaders and advocates, and try to shape opinion and be advocates for the policies in a way that a citizen assembly cannot be. But I think as a way for getting getting the sense of the community, but not in but in a thoughtful sense. I mean, obviously, it's so easy to turn an issue into a bunch of outraged people through Twitter or Nextdoor or whatever people used to get mad at each other. And citizen assemblies I think do a really good job of allowing people to actually listen to each other and come to some reasoned recommendations. So it's a way to provide some really good, recommendations to the politicians. Another place that they've done some really interesting work, Oregon did this for a while, they've done this elsewhere, but citizen assemblies that provide commentary on ballot measures. And so, ballot measures, tend to have the advocates on both sides trying to get people annoyed. And Oregon had a process for a while where if there was a state initiative, they would call it the citizen assembly, which would deliberate on it for a while and write their commentary on it. So before you voted, you could read what a group of citizens, some of whom were like you and some of whom were like people you didn't like, all sat in a room together for a week and where they came out. So I think there's a lot of really avenues. And yes, I mean, I think we will have a much better chance of surviving the 21st century if we make use of these governance innovations. You're on mute, Lauren.
I'm unmuting now.
Okay.
So that's it for the chat questions, but raise your hand if you have something else that you would like to ask. I feel like there was so much meat in that presentation that maybe just having conversation is a good, and we're a small enough group, is a good way to go for the next 10 minutes or so. Would anyone like to help that move forward?
I got a quick question.
Yes.
Would you consider in your definition of transformation, another term that works for that be paradigm shift? In other words, are we talking about the
Say the last sentence again.
paradigm shift versus transformation? They're basically the same, or
Yeah. I mean, it depends what you mean by paradigm shift. I mean, I think the basic answer is those are pretty similar terms. I don't know. I mean, do you see something different than paradigm shift than the short definition I gave of transformation?
I don't think so. Where I was going with this is that I think we have a big opening when we look at how people are living their lives, stuck on treadmills where they're becoming mass consumers or hyper consumers of goods and services they don't even need or probably. Whereas a society that's going into deep debt and ruining their lives, buying things that they really don't need. There's an opening there for us, I think, to not only show how we can change the world for the better, clean up the air and slow climate change, but also improve the quality of people's lives. That's an attitude change that needs education. It's just a thought. When I think about paradigm shift, that's what I'm thinking of, because if we assume that it's true that we use 25 acres per year of productive earth surface per person in this country, there's no way that the rest of the world is going to live that way. One, and number two, a lot of that consumption is unnecessary because it's not making us better or happier. And so that's when where I'm going with paradigm.
So that's totally consistent with the phrase transformation. In the definition I stuck on the slide, it had fundamental change significant change in the fundamental attributes of a system, including goals and values. And so that, I think, is consistent with what you're describing. People understanding the good life differently than at least in developed countries. understand the good life differently than perhaps they're doing it now.
Okay. If there are there any other questions? If not, I have another related one.
Go ahead, Will. I do have another one related
You
to
first.
Rob's comment about protest.
Go, Lorraine.
Oh, okay, well, you know, I just am someone who loves a good protest. What can I say? A good protest, right?
Yes.
And you spoke of that as a catalyzing condition. And I'm wondering if I'm wondering if you just might say a little bit more about that. We as an organization are really drilling into the concept of advocacy as our niche. And
Yeah.
I think protest is part of that, but there's so much more to that catalyzing condition. And also we have a connection to a lot of young people, not exclusively our connection. But I'm just wondering if you have any reflections on youth protest and those things and advocacy as catalyzing conditions.
Yeah. So, I mean, actually, probably people on this call who know a lot, more sophisticated thoughts about, protest and, where it is most effective and where less. So, let me start with a different, slightly related, but slightly different question to kind of veer back to that. I mean, there's a big debate in the climate community about, positive visions versus, frightening people. And, and where I think, frightening people does have its role, but I come down pretty heavily on the positive visions side, that, that painting a positive vision for, the world that we could have. And this relates to Bill's question, right? It's like, we can have a, fulfilling, a great high quality life. We can have, sufficient stuff around us, but we can also have an environment both locally and globally, which thrives. And, we can in fact have it all if we conceive it right. Right. And so, putting out that positive vision, which is part technology, part behavior change, is, I think, really important. And in some sense, I think people are pretty scared, and it's more, they get that climate change is a danger, but it's like, they want to have a vision that they can do something about it in a way that, that's not going to make their lives even worse. And so I think laying out the positive vision is really powerful. The role of a protest in that, I mean, I think, people coming out and, being there, being in, grabbing people's attention, showing how important it is to them. I think that can be great. I mean, obviously, it's being peaceful, respectful, and all that sort of thing is important. But yeah, I mean, getting in people's faces, I think, can often play a really powerful role. I think then, there needs to be, it's like, and what we would like you to do, and then there's the positive vision. But yeah, I mean, I think protest can be really important.
Thank you.
Her
Chris
hand.
has her hand up. And Chris,
Yeah.
we'll get to you, Will, after Chris.
Hey, Robert, it's great to see you and everybody here.
Yeah, great to see you.
I kind of want to play off of what the last two questions have dealt with and your response. I think, you've been great at talking about participatory democracy in many ways over the years. And I'm wondering if CASM's role can be sort of this combination of protest in an educational way. I protest. You think of the derivation of that word, or the root of the word rather, and it is about affirming the kinds of sophisticated lives that we can lead in a much simpler way. So I'm almost thinking about, us creating settings for where we're demonstrating that. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I had the guts to say to the city council, okay, I gave up my car in 1998, and quit, and then at a meeting of the TMO, the Transportation Management Organization advisory team, I don't know, now 2 years ago, it was actually, Lorene, you might remember this. It was actually, and Kent, a status symbol to say, I don't really have a car anymore, or I barely use my car. And it was really interesting. It was the first meeting I'd been at where everybody looked to each other to sort of ratchet up how, who was doing what. So maybe instead of what we think of in your face negative protest, where we had to draw a line, it's in your face positive. We are testing in a productive way this more, and to kind of have fun with a different idea of how, and I don't have much more to say about that right now, but I'm really, because I think, we have Ella. Ella is a CASM alum, as you know, on this call, and we think about all the ways that they're already facing harsh facts, need to face harsh facts. We all do. But from those harsh facts can also be a kind of recreation of how we grasp the work together. So anyway, that's just
that's great.
Bunch of thoughts that are coming to mind now, thanks to your presentation.
Yeah, I just agree with all you say, and then just throw in that, I think, the teach-in is sort of a classic, complementary to the protest part, right? It's like, we're protesting this, but now we're also gonna, if you go over that lawn, there's a bunch of people discussing, what to do, right? And, so there's the yelling over here, chanting whatever.
There's the affinity groups.
Yeah,
and,
but it's like, okay.
Yeah.
If you want to understand what to do about it, there's a place over there to go talk, and maybe that's in it. That's something that CASM, CASM's already doing that with things, but sort of integrating them, or more of both.
Thank you, Chris. We'll take one more question from Will. We have reached the hour mark. After Will's question, we'll turn off the recording and we'll end the meeting because it is dinner time. So Will?
No, I'm hungry. And my question was about carbon sequestration, and that's too long. This is another entire presentation.
Okay.
So I'm going to skip the question.
Okay. All right.
So we can all eat.
Thank
Well,
you.
maybe we should do one on exotic but maybe useful technologies sometime.
Yeah.
I think I would, there was the boat in Northern California that was seeding the clouds. I mean, let's talk. I love that. What was the word you used? Puzzling?
Exotic but potentially useful. Though maybe
Exotic but potentially useful technologies, and can we try them here? Well, moving forward, thank you all. Thank you all, citizens of the biosphere, and citizens of the community members rather of the experimentalist, future-oriented, pro-positive testing Santa Monica climate community. Thank you all very much for being here. Yeah, thank you.